Good evening, everyone, and welcome back. Settle in, get yourself comfortable, maybe wrap a blanket around your shoulders and dim the lights just a little, because tonight we are going somewhere that will stay with you long after the final word fades. This is Ghost Week, and I have saved the very best for last. 7 deeply unsettling, completely true paranormal stories, each one told by the very person who lived through it. These are not legends passed down around campfires. These are not borrowed tales or dramatized fiction. These are real accounts from real people, ordinary men and women who were simply going about their everyday lives when something extraordinary, something deeply disturbing, reached through the veil of the ordinary world and touched them in ways they will never, ever forget. There is something about true paranormal stories that gets under the skin in a way no horror movie ever could. A movie can be switched off. You can remind yourself it is actors and special effects and clever camera work. But when someone sits down and says, "This happened to me, I was there, I do not fully understand it, and I am still afraid," that is a different thing entirely. That is the kind of story that makes you glance over your shoulder on your way to the kitchen at midnight. That is the kind of story that makes you hesitate before you reach under the bed for your slippers. And tonight, we have 7 of them. We have accounts of voices heard in empty rooms, of figures glimpsed in doorways, of creatures with clawed arms that showed up again and again across years and across different homes. We have a family huddled on a mattress in a holiday cabin kitchen because no one dared go back to sleep in their rooms. We have shadow figures that crouched beside sleeping people in the dark. We have seeds falling from thin air in the middle of the night. And we have a moment of eerie connection between 2 young people on a mountain road who felt the tremor of tragedy before they even knew it had happened. So I want you to get truly settled. Make your tea, your coffee, your warm drink of choice. Find your coziest spot. And then let these stories wash over you because every single one of them deserves your full attention. If this is your first time joining us here, welcome. We are so glad you found your way to this channel. Please do hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have an incredible community of listeners here, and we would love for you to be part of it. Now let us begin. I want to start by being completely honest with you. I am, under normal circumstances, one of the biggest skeptics you will ever come across. Anything paranormal, anything supernatural, anything that cannot be explained by logic and evidence. I have always been the first person to raise an eyebrow and look for the rational explanation. So please understand just how much it means for me to tell you that what I am about to describe genuinely shook me to my foundation. And no matter how hard I have tried to explain it away, I simply cannot. A few weekends ago, I went on a ski trip with one of my closest friends. We set off at around 6 in the evening, heading to a cabin that would take us roughly 4 hours to reach. The first couple of hours were perfectly pleasant. We were talking, laughing, playing music through the speakers, just 2 friends enjoying the open road. It was easy and light, the way a good trip is supposed to feel when you are with someone you are comfortable with. But around the 3rd hour, everything changed. By that point, it was completely dark outside. We were winding through mountain roads where every curve looked exactly the same as the last one. The moon was faint and barely offered any light at all, and outside the beam of our headlights there was simply nothing, just thick, pressing darkness stretching away on both sides of the road. The roads were nearly empty. And then, almost as if the atmosphere itself was setting a scene, our music died. The streaming service cut out because we had lost all mobile signal, and what replaced it was a silence that felt heavy and wrong. Neither of us said anything for a long time, but we were both feeling it, this creeping, inexplicable sensation of danger. My friend turned to me at one point and said he felt strange, like something bad was on its way. We could not name it, could not point to anything specific, but the feeling was undeniable, like a pressure in the chest, like a warning. And then out of nowhere, my friend said something that stopped me cold. He said, "You know, in 5 or 10 years, we are probably going to know people from school who have died. Car accidents, drug overdoses, things like that. It is so strange to think about. It really can happen to anyone." It was such an odd thing to bring up. We never talk like that. We are not morbid people. Death is not a topic we sit around discussing on road trips. But we talked about it for a while that night, and gradually the strange feeling faded, and we arrived at the cabin without incident. The next morning, my friend picked up his phone and found an email from his old high school. 6 students had been involved in a serious car accident the previous night. 4 of them had died at the scene. 2 more were in critical condition. One of the girls who died had been his desk partner. He had known her well. And when we checked the timeline, the crash had occurred at almost exactly the same moment we had been driving through that mountain darkness, feeling that inexplicable dread, talking about death in a way we never normally would. I have turned this over in my mind many times since then. I am not a good enough writer to fully capture the feeling we experienced that night. But the closest I can come is this. It was as though the force of those young lives leaving this world all at once sent out a ripple, like a stone dropped in still water, and somehow, impossibly, we felt it from miles and miles away. I am 26 years old now, and for as long as I can honestly remember, my life has been accompanied by things I cannot explain. It began quietly, in small and puzzling ways, while I was still living with my parents in our family home. One ordinary evening, I was standing at the bathroom sink brushing my teeth. The room was still and quiet around me, windows shut tight against the chill outside, no one else nearby. The mirror had fogged slightly from the running water, and the only sounds were the normal, comfortable ones of an evening at home. And then the toothpaste tube on the counter began to rock, slowly, steadily, back and forth. It was sitting several feet away from me, well beyond my reach, nowhere near a window or a vent. There was no draft, no vibration, nothing that could account for what I was watching. It rocked for a few long, silent seconds, and then it simply stopped. I stood there, toothbrush still in my hand, staring at it, waiting for it to happen again. It did not, but I did not forget it. Not long after that, I was pulled from sleep in the middle of the night by the sound of slow, rhythmic creaking beside my bed. The rocking chair, the one that had always sat completely still and undisturbed right next to where I slept, was moving on. Its own swaying gently, steadily, as though an unseen person had just settled their weight into it. The wood groaned softly with each rock, and I lay there, heart hammering, unable to look away. Eventually, I gathered myself enough to speak aloud, quietly but firmly, asking it to please stop. And it did, immediately, like it had heard me. The nights were hard in other ways, too. Underneath my bed, pressed right up against the base of my pillow, I kept a set of metal money tins, heavy, sealed, completely stationary under normal circumstances. But on certain nights, those tins would rattle and scrape against the floorboards as if someone were reaching under the bed and sliding them around. I would feel the vibrations coming up through the mattress beneath me, steady and deliberate, and there was simply no explanation for it. No other metal objects nearby, no pipes, nothing. It would go on until I was too exhausted to lie there listening and would finally drift into an uneasy sleep. About a year ago, I moved out and into an apartment with my partner, and I genuinely hoped that distance from the old house might mean the disturbances would fade. They did not, they followed me. One evening, I came home from work expecting to walk into an empty apartment. My partner had warned me the day before that his work shift would run long, so I knew he would not be home for hours. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and the moment the door closed behind me, I heard his voice, clear and warm and completely unmistakable, calling out from the back bedroom. Just a simple, casual hey, as if he had beaten me home after all. I felt a rush of happy surprise and called back to him as I walked down the hall toward the bedroom. But there was no reply, no footsteps, no rustle of movement. When I reached the doorway, the room was dark, completely dark. No lights, no television, no sign of life whatsoever. He was not there. I checked every room. The apartment was empty. I grabbed the dog's leash and went outside to walk, needing the open air and the sound of the street to calm my nerves. Our dog, who has always been the gentlest, most placid creature in the world, the kind of dog who never barks indoors, who only growls at genuine threats, started behaving strangely during the evenings when I was home alone. He would station himself at the living room doorway, growling low and insistent at empty space, his whole body tense and focused on something I could not see. And then the incident started escalating. One night I was fully awake, calm, and just settling in for sleep. My mind was clear. My body was relaxed. I had not even begun to drift off yet. And then a voice, not my partner's voice, not any voice I recognized, snarled directly into my ear with unmistakable fury. "I hate it when you do that." The words were sharp and venomous, and so close that it felt like the speaker's lips were practically brushing my face. In the same instant, an enormous pressure slammed down across my chest. It was like two heavy hands or knees were pressing me into the mattress with full force. I could barely move. I could barely draw breath. I lay there pinned and terrified, fighting to stay calm, struggling against something I could not see or touch or reason with. It lasted a minute, perhaps two, though it felt like far, far longer, and then, as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. I lay there in the dark, gasping, drenched in sweat, and absolutely certain of one thing: I had not been asleep. This was not sleep paralysis. I had been wide awake from beginning to end. Just weeks ago, another night brought another violation. I was nearly asleep, that soft, heavy feeling of the first edge of rest beginning to pull me under when I felt it, a light, deliberate tickling beneath my chin. Playful in the way a taunt is playful. I was out of that bed before I even had a conscious thought, standing in the middle of the room with my heart slamming, scanning every corner of the empty space around me. If something similar has ever happened to you, a voice you could not explain, a presence you could not see but absolutely felt, please share your experience in the comments below. You are not alone, and this community is a safe place to talk about it. While I was on the phone with my mother one afternoon, describing these experiences to her, she suddenly interrupted me. Their Ring doorbell had chimed at their house. When my father checked the footage right away, he found nothing. No one at the door, no motion detected anywhere near the entrance at any point that day. Whatever this is, it is not confined to my apartment. And now it has spread to my family home, where my brothers and parents still live. Over the past few weeks, the activity there has intensified sharply, affecting every single member of the household. One of my brothers heard the distinct voice of our younger brother shouting from down the hallway, a very specific, very characteristic phrase that he only ever uses when he is genuinely frustrated. When my brother went to investigate, the younger one was sound asleep in his room. He had said nothing. My mother heard our youngest child call out for her in a pleading, urgent voice from somewhere just behind her in the kitchen late one night. She knew instinctively, with that particular certainty that mothers sometimes have, that it was not actually him. He was upstairs in bed, fast asleep. She refused to turn around. She stood very still, held herself together, and has since refused to be in the living room alone after dark. My father, who has spent his entire life dismissing anything paranormal with a good-natured laugh, has now heard an unfamiliar voice say something to him directly inside that house. Words he could not attribute to the television, to the neighbors, to any rational source. It shook him in a way nothing had before. Both of my brothers have seen shadowy figures moving through the rooms. One of them described, in shaking detail, watching what appeared to be an elderly woman, someone we believe may have been our late grandmother who passed away just before all of this intensified, walk calmly into my parents' bedroom one evening and stand there looking at him. He blinked and she was gone. Moments later, the bedroom door swung shut on its own. He rushed in expecting to find someone. The room was empty and dark. Even my partner, who, like my father, had always been completely dismissive of anything supernatural, had his own encounter just recently. We sleep in separate rooms because I leave for work at an early hour. Last night, he woke to find someone sitting at the foot of his bed. A tall, still figure with the moonlight catching the top of its head in a way that gave it an eerie sheen. He assumed for a moment it was me. Then unease crept in and he switched on his torch. The figure vanished instantly, as though it had never been there at all. Even during a holiday we took a few weeks ago, the feeling followed us. From the moment we arrived at the rental property, I felt watched, unwelcome. My partner admitted the next morning that during the night, he had gotten up to close a rattling interior door, and in the dim light had seen a tall figure stride rapidly across the room from one side to the other. Silent and swift, he had held back from telling me right away, not wanting to frighten me further, but his own unease had eventually overridden his restraint. I keep thinking of that line from the film Insidious. It is not the house that is haunted. It is you. Because that is exactly what this feels like. It started with me. And now, as I have opened up and begun speaking about it, the people closest to me are experiencing it too, as if whatever this is feeds on acknowledgement and grows stronger the more it is noticed. I have read about mimics, entities from folklore that are said to copy voices and mannerisms in order to lure or frighten. I do not know whether that explains any of this. I am not claiming to have answers. I am simply telling you what has happened and what continues to happen and hoping that someone out there may have insight, because this shows no sign of stopping. I'm going to take you back now, all the way back to when I was about 4 years old. We lived in a house on the edge of town, close to a forest, with a lake nearby that technically belonged to the neighboring property. 200 meters apart from each other. Ours was the one deeper in, closer to the trees and the water. One afternoon I was alone with my older sister. We were watching television together, and I became thirsty and went to the kitchen to get a drink. Our house had very few proper doors. Most of the entrances were open archways. But the kitchen doorway had one of those beaded curtains, strings of small balls hanging from the top of the frame that clinked and swayed whenever someone passed through. The hallway leading to it was long and slightly dim. I walked into the kitchen and saw immediately that the syrup bottle I liked to mix with water was up on the counter, too far away for me to reach. I called my sister's name. She did not come. I called again, louder, still nothing. I was 4 years old and increasingly frustrated, so I did what 4-year-olds do. I started to cry and scream. And then everything went silent. Not just quiet, silent. The clock above the door, which had always ticked steadily in the background of that kitchen, stopped. The refrigerator, which hummed constantly, went completely still. It was as though someone had reached into the world and turned off all the sound at once. I remember the sensation very clearly. It was like going suddenly deaf. Then came a stomp. A single, heavy, furious stomp on the floor, the kind of sound a person makes when they are very, very angry. Before I could even fully process what I had heard, it was moving. Running. Something was running fast along the hallway toward the kitchen, and I leaped up onto the table in pure instinct and crouched there, staring at the doorway with my breath caught in my throat. 2 seconds later, a mutilated human body was shoved into the doorframe and dropped to the floor. It lay there looking up at me. The eyes were pushed outward from the face in a way that reminded me of a snail's eyes on their long stalks, protruding and terrible, and fixed on me with something that felt like intent. I could not scream. I was so far past fear that my body simply could not produce sound. I just stared at it, and it stared at me. And then it was dragged away, pulled back around the corner of the door frame just as suddenly and violently as it had been thrown in, so fast that the entire bead curtain shook and swayed and clattered like a strong wind had rushed past it. The clock started ticking again. The refrigerator hummed back to life. Everything returned to normal in an instant, as if nothing had happened at all. A minute later, my sister walked into the kitchen and laughed at me for sitting on the table looking pale and tearful. I climbed down and said nothing. I was too afraid to speak. I told a friend at kindergarten the following week, but she made up her own story in response, and I let the matter drop. For about 2 years after that, nothing significant happened. But then we moved into the other house nearby, the one my friend's family had lived in before us. That was when things grew darker. My room in the new house was at the far end, the furthest point from the front entrance. One night I woke to a clicking sound and sat up in the dark, trying to find the source. And then I looked at the window. A dark figure was sitting just outside, on the windowsill where the flower boxes were. It was looking directly at me, and what I remember most about its face were the white pupils, pale and glowing in the darkness, and the jaw, hanging far too low, unhinged like a broken door. The sight of it paralyzed me completely. I pulled my blanket over my head, and as I lay there under the covers, I heard it drop down from the window, run around the outside of the house, and then the gate opened, the front door opened. The house went very quiet. Then something pressed my hands into the mattress and pushed my face downward, covering my mouth and nose and making it impossible to breathe. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds, and when it let go, I sat bolt upright and stared around my room. I looked at my sister in the bed across from me. She made a strange sound as I turned my eyes toward her, something between a murmur and a sigh. I checked the floor, the ceiling, the window. Nothing. I am not proud of what I did next, but I was a child trying to understand. I pulled the blanket back over my head and waited to see if it would happen again. It did. This time it lasted longer, closer to 10 seconds, and the pressure held my arms and upper body firmly while I struggled beneath it. In the very last moment, when I genuinely believed I was about to die, it released. I sat up again. My sister made that same peculiar sound as my gaze found her. I lay back down. Somehow I fell asleep. In the morning, I realized that there had been a small wardrobe positioned directly behind my pillow at the head of the bed. I had never thought to look there during the night. Looking back, I feel profoundly grateful that I did not. About a year after that, my old friend visited with her mother. We sat in my room and played with building blocks, and at some point, an empty plastic bag sitting flat on the floor, not near a vent, not near an open window, lifted straight into the air above our heads at a perfect 90-degree angle and landed neatly just behind where my friend was sitting. We looked at each other. She made no comment and kept talking as though nothing had happened. I followed her lead. Then there was the summer my grandmother came to stay. On a Sunday morning, I woke up and found a long piece of hair spread across my blanket in front of me. It was far too long and abundant to be mine, and I rushed to find her and tell her. She came in, looked at it, and it seemed to have shrunk, become only a third of its original size since I had first seen it. She joked that it might be a spider. I did not think it was a spider. A month into that same summer, my sister took me on a day trip to Buzov Castle. When we returned home and everyone had gathered outside, I came in through the front door alone, moving quickly because I was excited to be back. I crossed through the entrance and into the living room, and something in the corner caught my eye, a shift behind the large armchair next to the sofa. I looked more carefully. A massive arm was rising slowly over the armrest. It was covered in thick, coarse, dark fur that seemed to swallow the light rather than reflect it, and the hand at the end of it ended in long, curved claws. It was enormous, the arm itself as thick around as my thigh. For a frozen moment, I could not process what I was seeing, and then the terror broke through and I ran. I fled through the door and down the stairs in a single panicked leap, slammed the door behind me and pressed my back against it, shaking, while from the other side I heard scratching against the wood. My parents shouted at me from upstairs, annoyed at the noise. They knew about my fear of the dark. What was I going to say? I said nothing. I told no one. 2 years passed. My sister eventually moved out, driven by her own growing unease. She had glimpsed things too, though we rarely spoke of it. Without her, the house felt larger and emptier, and the feeling of being watched grew steadily heavier. I found comfort in daily walks through the nearby forest with our dog Luna, a mixed shepherd who largely ignored commands and disappeared into the undergrowth whenever she felt like it. One autumn afternoon during one of those walks, Luna stopped walking and stood very still, ears pricked, staring back into the trees behind us. I walked on, thinking it was nothing. Then she turned and growled, but quietly suppressed, the way an animal growls when it is afraid of drawing attention to itself rather than trying to sound threatening. Chills moved across my skin. I turned to look behind me. For a moment, nothing, just the trees, the branches stirring in the autumn breeze. Then 3 seconds later, I caught it. A huge silhouette ducking behind an oak tree some distance back. Whatever it was far too large to be a person. Its movements were smooth and controlled, not clumsy, not panicked, but deliberate, fluid, almost graceful in a way that was more frightening than clumsiness would have been. Luna stopped growling entirely and pressed herself against my leg. Her whole body was trembling. I kept moving forward slowly. Twigs snapped nearby. I looked back again. The arm was draped over the trunk of the oak tree, and the long, curved claws were tapping the bark in a slow, rhythmic pattern. It was the same arm, the same claws I had seen in the living room 2 years before. A lumberjack was working nearby, and I screamed for help. He came running through the brush with his axe, asking what was wrong. I asked if he had seen anything come from that direction. He had come from exactly that direction. He had seen nothing. I nodded, and we walked back quickly. I did not tell him what I had seen. I did not go back to that forest for a full year. Paranoia settled into my bones and stayed. I began checking over my shoulder constantly, during walks, during the school day, on the way home with friends, until my friends would snap at me in exasperation to stop. We moved eventually to a different house in a small town, just as I was beginning 6th grade. A new start. A new room, my desk against one wall facing a large window that turned into a dark mirror every night. A glass door to my left opening into my parents' bedroom, another door to my right leading to the living room. During long gaming sessions at my computer, I began catching movement in the corner of my eye near the glass door. The outline of something tall and dark, there for just a moment, and then gone the instant I turned to look. Every trip to the bathroom beyond that door became an ordeal, a dash-in, a rush through whatever I needed to do, a careful, quiet retreat. 5 months after moving in, at around 2 in the morning, a clicking at the glass door pulled me sharply from sleep. I sat up and looked, and it was there, pressed flat against the glass, face tilted toward me. Sunken eyes with pupils so fully dilated they looked like black holes. Wide palms splayed against the surface, and those long curved claws dragging deliberately across the glass, leaving faint, pale scratches. And the smell, a thick, low, deeply wrong odor that seeped through the cracks around the door frame and made my stomach clench. I rolled toward the wall, pressing myself into it, eyes shut so tightly that the pressure brought tears. My breathing was ragged and shallow. And then I heard the door open, the soft scrape of it, the muffled creak of heavy footsteps crossing the carpet toward my bed, slow and measured, as though it already knew exactly where I was lying and saw no reason to hurry. An icy breath moved across the back of my neck. I do not remember falling asleep, but 3 hours later I woke to find I could not move at all. From my neck all the way down to my toes, nothing. A a complete heavy. Total paralysis that held me no matter how hard I tried to fight against it. In the darkness, I could sense something vast and heavy standing in the center of the room between me and the door. I could hear its breathing, deep and slow and wet, like something very large exhaling with effort. The paralysis held for another 30 minutes after I woke at 7. When feeling finally returned to my body, I lay there for a long time before I felt capable of getting up. By the time I reached high school, the overt encounters had eased into something more like background dread, always present but less acute. Then one night at 3 in the morning, headphones on but silent, I heard a closet door clicking in a regular rhythm. 3 times, a deliberate interval like a countdown. The third time I turned and watched the middle of 3 tall closets swing shut in a single sharp movement. Too fast, too forceful, nothing like the drift of a loosely latched door. It was playing with me. It knew I was watching. I fell asleep in my gaming chair that night rather than cross the room to bed. When I was 18, a long night up late ended with me finally going to bed at 2 in the morning. I sat propped against my headboard, not lying flat, not fully exposed, still trying to maintain some sense of control when sounds from the living room next door reached me. Slow, irregular footsteps, the rustling of a plastic bag being rifled through. I lay still and listened for a long time, and then came a loud, clumsy crash. Something had tripped over an object on the floor and fallen heavily against my bedroom door. The door shook. Silence. Then the rustling started again, and another crash, harder this time. Something was trying to get up using the door frame as support, leaning its full weight against the wood. The door handle turned firmly with intent, and I screamed. Screamed until my voice broke, screamed for my parents, screamed until my mother finally stumbled out and swept the living room with her flashlight. Nothing, no bag disturbed, no footprints, an empty room. After high school, the disturbances went quiet for a while, long enough that I almost let myself believe it was over. But during my first year of work, with rotating shifts that often left me home alone in the afternoons, it came back. One afternoon, I was watching my sister's children play in the backyard with the rest of the family, while I looked on from the window. Everyone was outside, and then from inside the house I heard the sharp twist of a door handle followed by a violent slam. I turned around, and there it was, standing on the back of the couch in that tall corner just out of direct line of sight from the door. The tall, dark silhouette, patient, watching, waiting for me to look. I turned the music up as loud as it would go and stared at the wall until my family came inside. Even now, when I am left alone in the house, especially when my mother forgets to close the living room door fully, I will catch a pale face peering at me from that same spot on the couch. Eyes catching the light, still here, still watching. I have never written any of this down before today. This is the first time I have committed it to words, and perhaps that is something, too. This next account comes from someone who was around 6 or 7 years old at the time, young enough that what happened lived in memory with that particular sharpness that only the most deeply strange experiences preserve in us. The family lived in an old mobile home that they were renting, beat up and creaking, the kind of place that feels like it has absorbed decades of other people's lives within its walls. Strange things happened regularly. Heavy footsteps that thudded down the hallway toward the bedroom in the dead of night with no one attached to them. Lights switching off on their own. Voices drifting through the rooms after everyone was supposed to be asleep. The bathroom was a particular source of dread at night. There was always the feeling of something waiting in there, patient and unkind. On one occasion, a heavy dresser that had been in the sister's bedroom was found moved out into the hallway with no explanation. The sister was 9 years old. She could not have moved it alone, and she was found in tears when their parents discovered it. But the memory that stands out most clearly from that time is the thing under the sister's bed. The younger sibling would sometimes go into his sister's room to play, her dolls and his action figures spread across the floor in that easy, companionable way that young children occupy shared space. And on several of those occasions, when a toy rolled or bounced under the bed, it would come flying back out almost immediately. Not rolling gently, not sliding, thrown back out with purpose. As a young child, he was not especially frightened by this. He thought of it rather like the disembodied hand from the Addams Family films. There was even something almost playful about it that his young mind latched onto. He began to experiment, standing on the bed, deliberately throwing things down under it, almost every time back they came. Eventually, his curiosity overcame his caution, and he crawled underneath himself to have a look. There was nothing there, nothing at all. They moved out of that home when he was around 9. His parents have never been willing to discuss it much. But he eventually learned that a woman who was known as a medium had visited the house on one occasion and had, completely unprompted, told them that there was a man with no eyes sitting in a chair on the other side of the room. She said the spirit was good and meant no harm. Shortly after that visit, his parents made the decision to leave. He brings it up with them sometimes, even now. They still do not like to talk about it. If you are still with me, and thank you for being here, I want you to like this video and share it with a friend who loves a good ghost story. These accounts deserve to be heard, and your support is what makes this community possible. The next set of stories comes from one person who experienced quite a number of unusual events across different times and places in their life. I will take you through them one by one. The first she calls the haunted cabin at the lake. A few years ago, her family took a holiday to the Lake District, herself, her younger sister, her mother, her grandmother, and her grandfather. They stayed in a privately owned single-story cabin situated right on the shoreline, with its back wall facing miles of open forest and rolling hills. There were no nearby neighbors to speak of, just a few retired couples spread thinly along the water's edge. It was the most remote and isolated holiday the family had ever taken. The cabin had a charm to it in the daylight. It was clearly old, the wood dark and splintered with age, the angles and alcoves of the rooms suggesting a structure built long before modern styles. There were board games waiting for them, thoughtfully provided, though they were thick with dust in a way that suggested no one had touched them in a very long time. And from the very first moment they arrived, the family shared a quiet, unspoken sense that they were not entirely welcome there. The feeling was subtle, but it was consistent. It pressed on all of them. On the first evening, the sisters walked along the beach for hours and found it genuinely lovely. A dead fish of impressive size, an elegant-looking house perched on a cliff across the bay, some interesting rock formations to explore. Away from the cabin, with the colors of the sunset spreading over the water and the lights across the bay reflected in the calm surface, it felt serene and beautiful. But the moment they turned back toward the cabin and passed through the gate that opened onto the sand, the moment they were back on the property, the unease returned. Immediate, unmistakable. That first night, the entire family was woken by a series of violent thuds. They rang out across the roof and from somewhere inside the walls, heavy and rhythmic and entirely unexplained. The mother later confessed that she had been frightened enough to want to leave right then, on the very first night. She had talked herself out of it, not wanting to waste money or cut the holiday short for everyone. They stayed for several days. The noises continued throughout. Everyone felt an underlying anxiety, a tearfulness without obvious cause, a persistent low-grade dread that they could not shake no matter how much they tried to enjoy themselves. And for the most part, they managed to enjoy the holiday despite it, until the final night. On that last night, an enormous thud rang through the cabin from the direction of the grandparents' room. Both the narrator and her mother woke simultaneously and immediately. They found each other in the hallway, both pale and wide-eyed, and made their way together toward the grandparents' room, deeply worried that the grandmother had fallen from her bed. They pushed the door open slowly and quietly, bracing themselves. Both grandparents were in bed, completely still and undisturbed, fast asleep. The mother and daughter stood in the doorway for a moment in the dark, and both of them had tears running down their faces without quite being able to say why. They backed away carefully, eased the door shut most of the way, and then the mother, who was not the most openly emotional of women, who had always maintained firmly that ghosts were simply not real, told her daughters that the three of them were going to sleep together on a mattress in the kitchen that night. All three. Together. None of them slept well. They lay huddled in the kitchen staring into the dark, waiting for morning. When daylight finally came, they packed and left as quickly as they possibly could. They said nothing to the grandparents, not wanting to frighten them. But the narrator later discovered that her grandfather had always been a believer himself. She and her mother and sister have never returned to that cabin. They made a quiet pact, the three of them, to never spend another holiday quite that isolated and remote. The second story she calls Shadow Men at the Rose House. Her father's house, which she refers to as the Rose House, was deeply, persistently haunted. She never felt safe there. It had a heavy and troubled atmosphere, oppressive in a way that was difficult to name but impossible to ignore. The presences in that house did not feel benign. They felt hostile. She was young enough to have created imaginary friends, partly just to have something companionable to speak to when she had to walk up the stairs alone at night. From a very young age, before she had any exposure to violent imagery, she was tormented by vivid, involuntary mental images of her parents lying mutilated in their beds. And whenever she tried to sleep facing away from the wall, a specific demonic dog face would flash across her mind and jolt her wide awake. She slept with her covers pulled up over her for most of her childhood. She has already told the story of the little girl in the hospital gown elsewhere, the one who appeared one evening and felt deeply and unmistakably malevolent. She has since wondered whether that figure was mimicking her deliberately, as she would later spend time in a hospital herself, wearing the exact same style of gown, following a serious medical event that changed her life. She wonders what it knew. But the story she is telling here is the one about the shadow men. This happened when she was a teenager. It was a very hot summer, and she left her window open to let in some air, something she usually avoided because the open window at night always brought with it a particular feeling of dread that she could not rationalize away. She had a double bed positioned close to the window and slept on the side nearest the rest of the room, leaving a narrow, empty space between herself and the glass. That night she woke to find something crouching in that space. Solid and dark, human-shaped but stretched, elongated in a way that distorted the proportions just enough to make it wrong. It was squatting on the pillow beside her with its arms resting across its knees, perfectly still, watching her. The feeling that came with the sight of it was not straightforward terror. It was something more specific and more strange, the overwhelming certainty that she was seeing something she was not supposed to see, that it was aware of her looking, and that this awareness was not safe for her. While still held in place by whatever had gripped her, she turned her head deliberately away from it, facing out into the room. And somehow, within moments, she fell back asleep. When she woke again in the same night and turned over, it was still there. By morning, it was gone. She might have eventually let herself believe it was sleep paralysis and nothing more. But years later, when her younger sister had grown into a teenager herself and moved into that same bedroom, they had a conversation that shattered that comfort entirely. Her sister, sleeping in the same bed in the same room with the same window beside her, had developed the exact same dread of leaving it open at night. She described a recurring dream, one that returned again and again, and each time advanced a little further. In the dream, a tall, dark, entirely solid figure was walking toward the house from the far end of the cul-de-sac. Each time she dreamed it, it had come a step or two closer than the previous night. And as it drew nearer, she could see that it was walking backwards. Its feet were pointing the wrong way, but its face was turned fully forward, looking directly at her. She eventually stopped opening the window. The dream stopped. When the older sister heard this account, she put her hand over her mouth and began to cry. Her younger sister laughed at her until the older one told her own story, about the same shadow crouching in the same bed in the same room beside the same window. Then they were both in tears, both shaking. They sat with it for a moment, and then made a mutual, wordless decision to close the blinds, put on a television program, and give themselves something ordinary to look at. There is a tradition in some cultures of entities known as jinn, which can be identified in part by inverted or backwards-facing features, particularly their feet. The family lives in an area with a substantial Muslim community and has some Arabic heritage. She finds herself wondering sometimes whether what she and her sister encountered at that window might fall under this description, and whether shadow people and jinn, as described in folklore, might be different names for the same kind of thing. The third story from this narrator is about handprints on a window. This also happened at the Rose house, the same location as the shadow men and the little girl. It was an entirely ordinary evening. The family was gathered in the living room doing their own things, reading, watching television, just being together in comfortable domestic quiet. Nothing felt different or wrong. There were no odd sounds, no strange feelings. It was just a normal night. She walked to the kitchen to get something to eat. The kitchen had a large window, very large, taking up most of the wall above the counter, positioned too high for her to reach even as an adult, let alone as a child. She turned on the light, turned toward the counter, and stopped completely still. The entire window was covered in handprints. Every single inch of glass, from the bottom edge all the way to the very top, handprints pressed there in extraordinary quantity. They were small, children's handprints, and they were at every angle imaginable, including upside down at the highest point of the glass, which no child could physically have reached. The rain had made them slightly blurred, and the kitchen light illuminated them in a way that made each one distinct and unmistakable. She called her father in. He came and stood beside her and looked at the window for a long, silent moment. There was a brief exchange, his name called out, a pause, silence, and then both of them turned off the light, walked out of the kitchen, and did not speak of what they had seen. She had, in the moment, taken a photograph on her phone, but the sight of it saved on her screen frightened her so thoroughly that she deleted it shortly afterward. She regrets that now. The fourth story is called The Creepy Working Farm Holiday. Another family trip, this time to a working farm in rural Wales, herself, her sister, her mother, and her father. She was a teenager or young adult at this point. The arrangement was that half of the farmhouse served as a holiday rental while the other half was occupied by the older couple who owned and worked the land. The farm was near a small campground, and visitors could come to see some of the animals kept on the exterior. There were horses, which she adored, and she was looking forward to spending time with them. She noticed a faintly unsettling quality to the atmosphere from the beginning, but it was mild enough that she was not truly concerned. She genuinely liked the farming couple and spoke with them often. She works in land-based and veterinary fields herself, and they shared detailed information about how they ran their operation, including the specific fact that they were a no-kill farm. Their livestock were sent to other sites for all processing. No animals were killed on the property. She filed this away. Somewhere inside the family's half of the house was a peculiar locked room, small, with a high narrow window painted completely black and a heavy lock on the door. They had been instructed firmly to leave it alone. Strange, certainly, but not their business. They let it go. Toward the end of the holiday, the family drove off to the beach for the day while she stayed behind, wanting a quiet day to herself. She had planned to find a good tree in the nearby forest recommended by the farming couple and spend the afternoon reading. The forest was on their private land, past the cow field and the sheep field, and adjacent to a small slate quarry. But when she arrived at the edge of the forest, something stopped her. The trees all had branches growing very low to the ground. The canopy was dense enough that even in the middle of the afternoon it was nearly pitch black inside. The terrain was steep and uneven, with dangerous drop-offs not far from the path. And something else, something she cannot name except to say that it was a physical sensation in her gut, a loud and absolute internal warning. Under no circumstances was she to go into that forest. She listened to it without argument and went instead to take some photographs around the quarry. Standing there in the open air with her camera, the sounds of the world began to disappear, one by one as though being turned off. The cars on the distant highway, the birds, the rustling of the wind through the nearby vegetation, gone. The only sound remaining was the distant lowing of cattle in the next field over, and their voices sounded wrong, distressed, alarmed. She found the sheep's leg in the base of the quarry. Fresh and bloody, hoof still attached, roughly torn from the body, not cleanly cut, not carefully separated. Torn, she thought of what they had been told about the farm being a no-kill operation. She thought about how very white the exposed bone was, how fresh. The feeling that came over her was not panic, not yet. It was more like an invisible hand pressing down on her from above, holding her very still, watching her, waiting to see what she would do next. She understood on some level below conscious thought that she needed to act as though nothing were wrong, to move naturally, to give no sign of what she had found or what she felt. She took a few more photographs. She turned and began walking back up the slope. On the path she had walked down minutes before, there were now 3 small symbols laid out in a line, made of bone, about 3 bones each. She had walked that exact path to get down to the quarry. They had not been there. Now they were. She did not stop to look at them. She stepped past them and ran. She cleared the fence at the sheep field and did not slow down until she was back on safe ground. From that moment forward, everything about the farm felt different. When the couple returned that evening, she could no longer access the warmth she had felt for them. She was certain they knew she had found something, and she had to perform a carefully controlled normalcy, answering their questions in measured tones, giving nothing away. Their questions felt pointed to her. She said nothing to her family. The horses, which had been affectionate and interactive before, had changed. They would eat the treats she offered, they would play and move around, but every time she turned away and began walking back up the path, she would look over her shoulder and they would be standing completely still, all eyes fixed on her in perfect silence. The moment she turned back again, they would resume their movement, Turn away, stillness and staring. Turn back, motion resumed. Again and again. When the holiday finally ended and they were able to leave, she felt with certainty that they were being permitted to go. Only just, barely. Now, what I am about to share with you comes all the way from Nicaragua, and it is one of the strangest accounts of this entire collection. For over a month at the time of writing, neem seeds had been falling every single night in the exact same spot on the dining room floor, a specific defined area that never changed. There were no neem trees anywhere near the house, no trees at all nearby. The house had been carefully inspected for any possible entry point, any crack, any gap, any pipe, or opening through which something might be falling. Nothing was found. The house was completely sealed. The seeds always fell around 3 in the morning. An infrared camera was set up to capture footage. The recordings showed the seeds dropping from above, but there was no visible source. No animals, no people, no mechanism of any kind. They simply fell as they had fallen every night for weeks. Then a few nights before this was written, the mother had a nightmare. In the dream, a dark creature on all fours came toward her, took hold of her hand, and tried to bite her. She woke from it in a state of real terror. The family had already been unsettled by the seeds. The dream made everything feel darker. They had checked carefully for every rational explanation. Rats, bats, birds, no access point existed for any animal. There was no attic, no drop ceiling, no hollow wall space where a cache of seeds might have been building up. No structural vibrations, no machinery nearby that could be causing something to dislodge. The seeds appeared in that one spot only and nowhere else in the entire house. No member of the family was responsible. They were asking genuinely, with open minds, whether anyone had encountered something similar, whether there were paranormal or spiritual frameworks that could account for it, whether there were further steps they could take to investigate or understand. What you would do in that situation, and whether you have ever heard of anything like it, I leave to you to answer in the comments. This next story is wonderfully different in tone, and I think it deserves its place here because it raises a question that may not have a frightening answer at all, though it certainly has a mysterious one. The person sharing this was around 9 or 10 years old at the time. The family lived in a 2-story house with a living room that faced the foot of the staircase. He and his sister were sleeping in a tent they had set up in the living room for the sheer adventure of it, the kind of indoor camping that children invent when they want to make an ordinary night feel extraordinary. At some point, he was not entirely sure if he had just woken up or had not quite fallen asleep yet. He saw a figure on the stairs, floating rather than walking, making no sound. It wore a pointed hat and had a long beard, and it looked, he says, unmistakably like Dumbledore, a wizard drifting downward through the air above the steps in the quiet darkness of the house. He felt confused. He did not feel especially frightened, though he is generally someone who startles easily. Some years later, the siblings spoke about that night. His sister mentioned that she had also seen something on the stairs, the same figure, a wizard with a beard floating. She had seen it going in the opposite direction, upward rather than downward, but the description was otherwise identical. He offers 2 possible explanations openly and honestly. Either they both genuinely witnessed the same thing independently that night, or they spoke about it the following morning and one absorbed the other's account and eventually came to experience it as a personal memory, something children do, quite naturally and without any deception. He genuinely is not certain which is true. But if they did both see it, what was it exactly? And why does it feel somehow like the kindest mystery in this entire collection? What do you think will happen to these families and these individuals as their experiences continue? Do you have a story of your own that echoes anything you have heard tonight? Write it in the comments. I read every single one, and nothing makes this community feel more alive than knowing we are sharing these experiences with one another. And if you have not already done so, please hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. These evenings together mean a great deal. Before I let you go for the night, I want to say a few words to all of you who have been here for Ghost Week. It has been an absolute privilege to record these stories for you. This week has given me so much joy, the making of it, and the conversations it has opened up with all of you in the comments. You are a wonderful, warm, curious, thoughtful community, and that takes your breath away a little. So today is a day for celebration and birthday cake and a party for her, which means tomorrow is also a busy day. I will try to put together something extra for you if I can, but we will have to see how the evening unfolds. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well if you can, and know that whatever is out there in the dark, you have good company on this side of the screen. Take care of yourselves. I will see you again very soon.